And good morning, Dog Nation. I am Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Breda Pest Management, and we are back live. Now, if you, 99% of the people don't watch the show live, so honestly, it's probably not that different to you, but it is a totally different energy for me. Not only do I get a chance to interact with our audience at the end of the show, but there's just a juice associated with kind of being in the moment and doing it live that just doesn't exist when you do it some other way. So we're really excited about that. We got Jake Fromm stopping by later on. That's a fun conversation. Jake gives you some great thoughts on Carson Beck, on the quarterback on the other side on Saturday, Spencer Rattler, and also an interesting look at what it's like to be an aspiring NFL quarterback when a situation happens like what it did with Aaron Rodgers on Monday night, what might be next the New York Jets. Jake's going to give us some stuff on that today here as well. Mike Griffith also on today's show too. And off the top of the program, I don't have hard evidence to support this, but I do have some circumstantial evidence. And when I lay all this out, I believe I'll make my case. I want you to remember that I said this when you see how it plays out on Saturday. I think that Kirby Smart setting a trap for South Carolina. And I think right now, Gamecocks are walking their way right into it. And it could not be working out more perfectly for these dogs. Let me tell you why off the top of our program today. Glad to have you with us for it. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Breda Pest Management, and it begins right now.
What is Beamer ball to you?
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Breda Pest Management, the official pest control of UGA Athletics.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
So we know that Kirby Smart has said in the offseason, kind of leading into the start of this year, that his number one concern for Georgia was complacency, battling against the idea that Georgia just wouldn't be as focused and motivated as it could possibly be for each of the games that it played. Smart has said that plenty over and over and over again. And as Georgia gets ready to begin SEC play on Saturday, you're led to believe that Smart's going to pull out all the stops to make sure Georgia absolutely is as focused as it can be, that Georgia fans in the stadium are absolutely as focused as they can be there as well. That's what the Tonka Hemingway stuff has seemingly been about this week. We've kind of laughed about this, that Hemingway at SEC Media Days, what he said about Georgia wasn't, he didn't say anything about Georgia, right? He was asked a question of, hey, what are the best environments in the SEC? Hemingway mentioned a couple. Georgia wasn't one of the places that he mentioned, and somehow that's been turned into bulletin board material for UGA. It's a pretty big stretch, to be honest with you, but all is fair in the SEC. To me, that sort of feels like an example of Kirby Smart trying to use anything possible at his disposal to make the environment with his team and his fans and everything else exactly what it needs to be on Saturday. So we've got some example and some evidence of that already for this week. But what if I told you there was something else perhaps going on here? Now, I can't prove this, but I am going to lay out my case nonetheless. I believe that Kirby Smart is laying a trap here. And I believe that right now, if he's not careful, and it seems like thus far he's kind of walking right into it, I think that Shane Beamer, who admittedly I probably like more than some of y'all do, but I think that Shane Beamer could be well on his way to walking right into Kirby Smart's trap, and I believe it could work out just perfectly for Georgia on Saturday. Let me kind of explain what I mean by this, and let me let you judge for yourself based on how the game plays out on Saturday. First of all, think about Beamer, famous last name, the son of Frank Beamer, longtime coach at Virginia Tech. What was Frank Beamer once known for, and is what Shane Beamer has also kind of been known for in the early stage of his coaching career? It's the idea of Beamer ball, which we mostly think about as kind of a special teams thing. But when Shane Beamer was on with Marty McGee, SEC Network, prior to the Tennessee game a year ago when his team hosted Tennessee, he was asked directly during that interview about, hey, what does Beamer ball mean to you? And Shane Beamer at the time was more than happy to kind of talk about the role that Beamer ball has played in his coaching career and his father's coaching career before that. This is a little bit of what Shane Beamer said on the SEC Network about that.
What is Beamer ball to you? To me, it's the ability that whatever unit is on the field has the opportunity to score. So it's your offense, it's your defense, and it's your special teams. You want to constantly be attacking, and we don't sit back and try and wait for something to happen on defense or special teams. We want to make it happen and be the aggressor and constantly attack and give those phases the ability to score points also, just like an offense will as well.
So in other words, Beamer says, hey, it's really in all phases of the game, but most of us who've been college football fans for a long time, we sort of think of Beamer ball as kind of being a special teams thing where, as Shane said, you want to be as aggressive as you possibly can. You want to block a punt. You want to make something happen on special teams. You want to find a way to use that unit to score and use that unit to be a difference maker the same way you'd want your offense to be, your defense to be. That's what you'd kind of want your special teams to be. And this week it's been kind of interesting when you think about Beamer, who once worked for Kirby Smart at Georgia. There's even been some chatter out there about the role that Beamer ball played in a Georgia season that almost resulted in a national championship back in 2017. Now, when Kirby Smart was asked about this on Tuesday night, he didn't want to play ball at all on what happened with that game against Alabama in 2017, the blocked punt that Tyler Simmons is onside. But Shane Beamer, when he was talking to the media this week, he was more than happy to talk about that. He was more than happy to talk about what they really felt like was a coaching advantage they had over Alabama and a chance for so-called Beamer ball to help propel Georgia to a national championship. Sometimes Beamer's pretty candid. Sometimes he's willing to kind of talk about things other coaches perhaps might not want to go into detail with. This was an example this week on the role that Beamer ball almost played in winning a national championship for Georgia back when Beamer was the special teams coach and an assistant here at Georgia in 2017. This is what Shane Beamer said about that during his weekly press conference here this week.
If you ask anybody in Athens what Tyler Simmons was onside means, they know. Because in the national championship game, Alabama punted. Kirby had come up with a plan that, we're going to show this look when Alabama punts. We're confident that they will do this. And then when they do this, we're going to do that. We were going to get a free rusher, we felt like, and we did. Came completely clean, blocked a punt, just like we had designed it to do. And unfortunately, the officiating crew, not an SEC crew, but the officiating crew absolutely blew the call. And I don't want to say cost us a national championship, but that was a significant play in the game.
So that clip right there is an example of something I said a moment ago of why I kind of like Shane Beamer, probably more than a lot of y'all do. I know that some of you think, well, he's the rival coach, and there's this rumor and stuff out there that Kirby Smart doesn't like him, so therefore if Kirby doesn't like him, we're not going to like him either, which to me makes sense if you're a Georgia fan. But there's an element of me that hears that kind of candor from Beamer, happy to go back and relive a moment from his coaching life previously that he has vivid memories of, and I think it's kind of nice that he's willing to be that candid. And, I don't know that every press conference has to be just sort of super deathly serious all the time. So the fact that Beamer's kind of willing to kind of play ball on some of that kind of stuff, I kind of appreciate that. And so when he's not facing Georgia, more often than not, I guess I probably find myself rooting for a Shane Beamer coach team against certainly plenty of the other teams in the SEC probably, but many of you don't feel that way. But pushing that aside, the point here is that there's this image of Beamer, Frank Beamer before that, Shane Beamer now, as this special teams guru, and that Beamer ball is this huge, huge idea that exists within college football of this expert special teams that is going to be a difference maker during games. And as with the way the media asked him about that in Columbia here this week, it was even a factor for Georgia when Beamer was the special teams coach here. That you've really built up the Shane Beamer brand, the Beamer ball brand, as this incredible difference-making facet of the South Carolina attack. And I don't know if you noticed this week or not, but when Kirby Smart was asked about Beamer ball, the special teams guru, the ability of South Carolina to change games when it comes to their special teams, guess what Kirby Smart did? Kirby Smart played right into that. Kirby Smart, who very frequently when he's asked about other coaches or other narratives, Kirby Smart does not play ball on some of that kind of stuff at all. Pretends to ignore the premise of the question. Certainly does not give a lot of compliments to coaches that he's competing against. That's not a very typical Kirby Smart thing. Yeah, he's got respect for everybody. But when it comes to specific things that build up the brands of specific coaches that he competes with, Kirby Smart almost never does that kind of stuff. But this week, when it comes to the huge brand of Beamer ball and their expert special teams, their ability to change games in that third phase of the game, Kirby Smart was more than happy to talk about that Beamer ball this week. I believe it's a trap. Take a listen to Kirby Smart being asked about Shane Beamer here this week.
Kirby, we're on generation 2 of Beamer ball where Shane's dad and him are both make their special teams. They mix it up. How do you prepare for that when you know that they're very good at it?
Yeah, they were tops in the conference last year in the little composite thing we do in terms of looking at all of them and ranking all the special teams units and then taking a composite of that. They were one in the SEC, and it's something they do a really, really good job of. I know he's very hands-on with that. He's passionate about it. It creates an identity for his players, and you can see them. They play that way on special teams. They play really hard on special teams units, so it's an important part of the game. And if you look at at least maybe our second game, I don't know about our first one, but it was impactful for us too. So you're going to have a lot of momentum plays in those units.
Now, I can't prove this, but I'm quite confident I'm right nonetheless. I believe the new 7-5 just dropped. I believe this is the new 7-5 of Georgia, who is a 28 almost point favorite against South Carolina, huge favorite in the game. But I believe there's a narrative within the Georgia program that when it comes to special teams, South Carolina's the favorite because that's Beamer ball, and you're just little old Georgia. I can't prove this for sure, but the fact that Kirby Smart was more than happy to say, oh, yeah, we chart this stuff. We rate this stuff. South Carolina, that's the best special teams we've ever seen. They're number one in the SEC. It's an identity for that program. This is the new 7-5 for this particular game. The new, Georgia, little old Georgia. This is the new 7-5 for this particular game. That Georgia special teams is going to be lucky to even keep pace with this Beamer ball special teams for South Carolina. And when Shane Beamer, perhaps unwittingly, but when he talks about, getting the block punt in the national championship game, things like that, I think he's actually kind of playing into the building up of the brand of Shane Beamer as a special teams guru. Now, admittedly, I believe he probably is a good special teams oriented coach. I think that has been a little bit of a hallmark of the Beamer coaching legacy. I think that's probably true. But in this particular game, when you're trying to pull out all stops and you're trying to grab everything you can for even the slightest possible advantage you possibly can get, challenging the Georgia special teams of, hey, you guys are facing Beamer ball on Saturday. Are you ready to cover their kicks? Are you ready to, provide opportunities for guys like Makai Muse like you did last week? Are you ready to block your own kick? Are you ready to score on special teams? Are you ready to do that kind of stuff? Are you ready to do that? I believe that's probably the message internally for this Georgia program. Why? Well, because it just sort of seems like the kind of thing that Georgia would do. But also I think it speaks to an issue that is incredibly important for Georgia all the time. Last night, Kamari Lassiter, the terrific Georgia cornerback, he was talking to reporters, and the subject of special teams came up with him. And, Lassiter talked last night about how important special teams kind of always been for him as a player and just how important special teams is for Georgia overall. So you think that Kirby Smart won't try to push this button this week, knowing that the special teams guru supposedly is on the other side, kick coverage, block kicks, things like that, knowing that Georgia's facing Beamer ball on Saturday? You think that Kirby won't try to push the special teams button for his own team here this week there as well? This is Kamari Lassiter from last night telling you how important special teams is overall to this Georgia program. That's what Kamari said.
Special teams for me is kind of near to me because that's how I initially got on the field when I first got here. My freshman year, me and JB, we used to joke around. We were special teams All-Americans because we weren't really sniffing the field with all those guys that were playing that year. But, man, we was on special teams, all 4 units. So, just being on that unit, it means a lot. And, Coach Smart, he says that the best players play special teams. So just being able to play special teams means a lot just because that means that the coach thinks that you're good enough to be on there.
Kirby Smart tells these players, hey, if you want to know if you're a good player or not, do I trust you to be on special teams? That's the message that Kirby's sending on a regular basis anyway. You think he's not sending that message even more on Saturday, both in part because it's a chance of the extra motivation knowing you're facing Beamer ball, but it's also a chance to, let's be honest here, what's something that Georgia needs right now? It needs a spark for its offense. The Georgia offense has been okay through 2 games, but probably hasn't been, great yet. Hasn't run the ball particularly well yet. Carson Beck still trying to figure things out. What's the best gift you could give an offense who's trying to kind of get going? How about some short fields? You think the Georgia offense would benefit from some short fields on Saturday? What's the best way to get short fields? Give Makai Muse a lane to run through the way he did to start the game last Saturday against Ball State. Block a punt at some point in time. How about get yourself a special team score at some point in time, the way that Muse also did there as well? All of a sudden, that's how you can build a big lead. Y'all watch the game on Saturday and see if this doesn't turn out to be true. I've told you before, I believe that Georgia throttles South Carolina on Saturday. I believe its largest margin of victory this season to date happens this weekend. How do you get there? I believe that Georgia's going to use its special teams, and I believe it's going to use the extra motivation of how good Kirby Smart's told these Georgia players that Beamer ball and the Gamecocks special teams units are as a way of being at its absolute best on special teams, whether it's a kick return, a blocked punt, or whatever else. I believe that Georgia's going to go out and set the tone for the day with what it does in its third unit, its special teams unit. And when Georgia coasts to an easy victory on Saturday, watch and see if special teams aren't the reason why. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Breda Pest Management, and we are back live, and we are loving life because of that. Whether you tune in 9:45 for our first and 15 at DawgNation.com or DawgNation app, 10 a.m. after that, all video platforms, noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, podcasts on demand anytime you want them. You're never impacted whether we're live or not, and we're grateful to have all of you out there still. Our first platform and, most days our biggest platform. Thankful to have the great podcast audience that tunes in each and every day to be a part of what we do around here. And a big thanks as well to great sponsors who make this show possible, like our friends at Breda Pest Management. Now, on Saturday, I think, pound for pound, you get the best atmosphere of the season inside Sanford Stadium. So when you're there, if you're lucky enough to be there, and you're looking around at this raucous crowd of 93,000 that's just shaking Sanford Stadium, I want you to keep one thing in mind. That building that you're sitting in, that stadium you're sitting in, is also protected from bugs and critters and maybe even runaway chickens on Saturday by our friends at Breda Pest Management, the official pest control provider of UGA Athletics. And it's not just Sanford Stadium, it's all the other athletic venues there as well. Bugs, critters, termites, they're all kept at bay and kept outside where they're supposed to be because of our friends at Breda Pest Management, the official pest control provider of UGA Athletics. And when you think about a company like Breda, in business since 1975, 125 employees, well-resourced company, using those resources for your benefit too by allowing you to save more money just by making the switch. And let's face it, it seems like everything in life is more expensive every day and only getting more expensive as time goes on. So anything that saves you money, anything that puts more money back in your pocket, that's exactly what you need here right now. And that's what our friends at Breda Pest Management are all about. So please find them online. It's bredapest.com, B-R-E-D-A. BredaPest.com, Breda Pest Management. Good friends of ours here on DawgNation Daily, and also the official pest control provider of UGA Athletics. So we got two fun interviews on our show today. Before we're done, it's the former Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm. Jake's going to give us some good stuff on kind of what it's like to be kind of a prospective NFL quarterback. Jake's obviously on the practice squad for the Washington Commanders. But at any point in time, a guy like Jake can be active on somebody's roster, maybe a team like the New York Jets. I mean, obviously, that's just speculation on my part, but we all saw what happened to Aaron Rodgers on Monday night. Jake will tell us what it's like to be an aspiring NFL quarterback in situations like that, where a good number of teams could perhaps be making roster moves over the course of the next few weeks. Jake also gives you great insight on what's happening for Carson Beck here right now as he moves into his third start. And after 2 weeks, what have we seen from Carson? And the guy on the other side there as well, Spencer Rattler, who's now been around the block a few times for the Gamecocks. We'll find out what Jake Fromm thinks about him. Mike Griffith joins us here in a couple of minutes there as well. But prior to that, let me give you a couple things. First of all, I told you this yesterday. Let me tell you again that DawgNation Invasion on the Tennessee River is sold out. We blew through our tickets on this as fast as we've gone through anything there in the past. So that is completely sold out. Thank you to so many of you who've made that such a successful thing for us. Sorry the Tennessee fans are so mad about it, but we're going to be rolling down the river in style and looking at watching Georgia just absolutely run wild on the turf there in Neyland Stadium there as well. We're excited about all of that. DawgNation Invasion on the Tennessee River is completely sold out. Now, here is the news, though, you need to know. If you wanted tickets, didn't get them, or whatever else, there is a waiting list. And I've been told the waiting list is working perfectly here right now. So if you go to DawgNation.com, I can't secure you tickets here at the moment, but we're going to try to get as many people on board the boat as we possibly can. So if we can find a way to get more tickets, rearrange some furniture or something like that, we're going to figure out a way to do that. So get in on the waiting list, and you can possibly be part of DawgNation Invasion on the Tennessee River. Go to DawgNation.com, get on the waiting list, and we'll try to let you know one way or another about that as quickly as we possibly can. Big thanks to everyone who's made that such a successful rollout. Can't wait to see you there in Knoxville coming up in November. Also, before we kind of move on with the show, let's get ready to go around the DawgHouse here right now. Poured today by our good friends at Dr. Pepper. Now, here is something I think is going to be really interesting on Saturday. There are a couple of playmakers who I thought asserted themselves in a very big way in Saturday's game against Ball State that you're kind of left to wonder, well, what could they possibly be like in the remainder of the season here for Georgia? At this point in time, you have to say the Mekhi Muse thing is just real. Muse is more than a good story. He's a very important part of this team here right now, especially in the phase of the game that we spent a lot of time talking about at the top of the show, the special teams phase. We believe Muse is a really big part of that. And the other kind of cool, interesting wrinkle that Georgia showed you on Saturday there as well was Dillon Bell at the running back position. Bell has kind of always been a wide receiver that looked like a running back, has some history at running back going back to his time at high school, really showed you a spark when he got a chance to play there on Saturday. What does that mean for him in the future, though? Kirby Smart's been asked about that a couple of times this week, including again last night, about the willingness of Bell to kind of go wherever he's needed for this Georgia team. This is good stuff from Kirby on Bell. Also name checks Mekhi Muse, too, Kirby from last night.
We'll always have that element, whether it's he or Muse or the other guys that can line up in the backfield and do it. So that's always going to be there. We have backs capable of doing that, too, when we're 100% healthy. So I don't know if I can answer that. And will we keep it there? It probably depends on how many wideouts are healthy, what we have week to week, what the game plan is. But certainly like to.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think a lot of Georgia fans left Saturday against Ball State hopeful that they would see more of Dillon Bell at the running back position, which is not to say that when he's fully healthy, Dajon Edwards and Kendall Milton can't be a very capable tandem of running backs. I believe they can. But even if they are, you're still down Branson Robinson from what you thought you'd have. I mean, I think Andrew Paul, as exciting as his future might be, this is still a guy that's only a year removed from a pretty serious injury. Roderick Robinson's an interesting player, but Dillon Bell's a completely different kind of player because I think he provides a little bit more of an athletic shiftiness than Robinson probably provides at this stage of his career. And, to be honest, Bell probably has a little bit more beef to him than what a Cash Jones might bring to the table. At least I think that's probably the case. So I just think that Bell's an interesting player, even if Kendall Milton and Dajon Edwards are back fully healthy. Now, Kirby would say, well, yeah, maybe an interesting player, though, more valuable to us at wide receiver, depending on what the overall depth situation is like there. I'll leave that to the coaches to decide. But when you kind of think about a Georgia team that's still in flux, trying to determine exactly what its identity is supposed to be, going to be, I think the presence of a guy like Bell last week certainly made the Ball State game more fun. He and Mekhi Muse both did. And seeing how they'll be used in Saturday's game when you face a more substantial opponent in SEC play, I think their presence should be pretty fun again there as well. And that is Around the DawgHouse, poured today by our friends at Dr. Pepper. And so happy to have college football back, and so happy to have Dr. Pepper back is a big part of that too. You're seeing the Fansville commercials each and every week when you're watching these games, and you're reminded that the rich, creamy flavor of Dr. Pepper is exactly what you want to make your game day everything it can be, whether you're talking about the original Dr. Pepper Zero Sugar, Diet Dr. Pepper, the Dr. Pepper Strawberries and Cream, whatever you got, all of that made better with Dr. Pepper. So when you're doing your shopping at your local Kroger, wherever you're kind of picking all that up, make sure you check out and get some Dr. Pepper for your game day watch parties and all the fun things you got going on. It's a delicious, one-of-a-kind Dr. Pepper. It's the one fans deserve. All right, so before we are done, as I said before, we're going to get Jake Fromm here coming up in just a little bit. There's also a pretty big game in the SEC that used to be as big as anything this league had, probably diminished in its notoriety here the last couple of years, but nonetheless a pretty important game on a relatively weak slate for college football overall. I've got some thoughts on that to share. And I think we've learned something about what's happening around Georgia for the first 2 weeks that I think probably needs to be addressed here. I probably kind of stumbled into this take, but I believe I'm probably right about that. So we'll get to that here coming up in just a little bit too. But for now, on what is next for Georgia, get ready to take on South Carolina. And what was it like to be kind of behind the scenes there at Bryant-Denny Stadium on Saturday in the most notable moment of this season here thus far when Texas beat Alabama? What was that like? Well, Mike Griffith was there. So what do you say we get ready to talk to him about that and what's next for these Dogs getting ready to take on South Carolina on Saturday? We are looking forward to doing all of that with you. It is a Georgia Farm Bureau Insider Update with Mike Griffith here today on DawgNation Daily. And it seems like we may still be. Is Mike ready to go? All right, we'll roll on with Mike here. So good to have Mike here on DawgNation Daily, Insider Update presented by Georgia Farm Bureau. Let's talk to Mike Griffith here right now.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
We'll say hello to Mike Griffith here, Georgia Farm Bureau Insider Update. And obviously, I think we're really happy to have a step up in competition for Georgia moving into SEC play after a couple of weeks' worth of games that I just don't think provided much fodder for conversation really at all. So, Mike, turning the page here, what is your expectation for Georgia against South Carolina on Saturday?
I expect a Georgia blowout. I expect Georgia to throttle the Gamecocks. I think the Dogs are eager to sink their teeth into the chickens. I think this is a South Carolina team that lacks the sort of line play that you need to compete with Georgia. Obviously, last year they went into Columbia and routed South Carolina. It was quite a victory. I don't know why it would be any different. I do know this Georgia team is missing some of the key components they've had, specifically a back like Kenny McIntosh that can catch the ball and do so many things out of the backfield, and what Kirby called a generational talent at tight end. First-round offensive tackle, left tackle, and I think that those missing pieces, not to mention Ladd McConkey being out, Dejon Edwards being out, and Kendall Milton being injured. I mean, my goodness, it's hard to really evaluate Carson Beck when he hasn't had the same sort of supporting cast that Stetson Bennett did. Now, that said, Brandon, I think that some of those guys will be back. I think, we're going to see Dejon. A pretty good chance we'll see Ladd, my guess would be. And I think there's going to be a different approach and mentality.
So what I have said is, and I'm like you, I expect Georgia to absolutely annihilate South Carolina on Saturday. I think the last 2 years, this game has been the one in which Georgia has looked as much like a national champion as any other game that it's played. Perhaps that's coincidence, perhaps it's not, but Georgia has been at its national championship best from a regular season standpoint, certainly against South Carolina in both the last 2 years. And so, therefore, I kind of expect that to be true again on Saturday. I have also been kind of working, Mike, from the hypothesis that I believe that the overall narrative this year is very similar to a year ago, in that I suspect that Georgia is far and away the best team in college football, and that Georgia may win the national championship this year with a similar level of ease to what it won the national championship a year ago. I think there's a strong possibility that's true. But if I'm wrong, this is the kind of game where evidence of that starts to show up, because let's say it's not a 40-point victory. Let's say it's not even a 5-touchdown victory. Let's say it's inside of the 4 touchdowns that the kind of experts sort of think that it is right now. Well, at that point in time, then I think it becomes reasonable to say, well, perhaps there is a little bit of regression, at least with where Georgia is right now. And perhaps the path towards a third straight national championship, or as we say around here, go for 3-23, perhaps that path isn't quite as easy as maybe it was a year ago. Because this is a common opponent that Georgia plays every year, has played every year, I think this is as interesting a measuring stick as Georgia's likely to have for a little while here, because we know how good Georgia typically has been against South Carolina. If they're not quite that good on Saturday, it would at least open my eyes to the possibility that we're about to have a different kind of conversation around Georgia this season. Do you agree with that?
Perhaps. If Ladd McConkey plays and Dejon plays, and they still sputter a little bit, then and they don't break like 24 points, then I would agree with you. But if McConkey is still out or limited, and let's keep an eye on Brock Bowers, by the way. Let's remember he didn't play many snaps, only 1 catch for 3 yards last week. Let's see how his health is. I'm a little concerned about him, quite honestly. He takes a lot of hits, and we all see Brock Bowers as Captain America because he's such a fantastic player, and of course. I had Benjamin Watson on the other night and compared him with Michael. Said he was the Michael Jordan of college football because he could do everything, and that was about the highest praise that, to me, Michael Jordan is the ultimate compliment for any athlete. I think he's the best competitor and athlete in my lifetime. Probably a whole other segment of the show, but to be compared to Michael Jordan by Ben Watson, who himself was a bit of a freak of a tight end, running that 4.40 at 6'3" and 260 and being a first-round pick. I mean, I just don't know. So to answer your question, I want to see the health of these guys. Brendan, I lean a lot more on the Auburn game, quite frankly. I'm not going to. This game, to me, is still a little bit of, what's the word I'm looking for? House money. I think Kirby can still kind of do what he wants against South Carolina because I just don't think they're that good. I think the road trip at Auburn is going to be, my early litmus test, and then obviously they play Kentucky next week. But I think the road trip at Auburn is the one. That's the game that's got me holding my breath a little bit to find out if this is a championship team.
We'll talk more about this on tomorrow's show, but the other thing I think is interesting for Georgia about South Carolina is I do think it's a chance for Georgia to remind folks about how good it is on defense in particular, because when you go out and have low point totals allowed against the likes of UT Martin and Ball State, that just doesn't mean very much. But Spencer Rattler, I do believe, is a good quarterback. I know they didn't have a great day offensively against North Carolina, and that obviously matters. I believe that was kind of low-key, one of the worst performances for an SEC team in kind of the pre-conference season here thus far. But Rattler had a huge conclusion to his year a year ago, and as I've talked about, I know that you've had some things to say about this too. It hasn't been a great rush defense start to the season for Georgia. Georgia also only has one sack here thus far. There's only a small handful of teams that have just one sack, Georgia being one of them. Ironically, LSU's another one. But there are a couple of numbers right now for Georgia defensively that don't necessarily feel Georgia-like. I think on Saturday it's a chance to remind people that as Georgia does try to win that third straight national championship, they're going to do it with a defense that I believe is made very similar in stock to the ones that it's had the last couple of years there as well. So that is something that I think that Georgia has a chance to prove here this weekend.
Yeah, and I'd say this about the North Carolina-South Carolina game, and then this is kind of a little insider's baseball, but Freddie Kitchens went from the South Carolina staff to the North Carolina staff, and there was some talk that Freddie had picked up a tip that was tipping North Carolina on South Carolina's pass game, that South Carolina was doing something to telegraph, and I believe that, because I've seen it in person. I saw 1999 Tennessee lose to Florida because Alex Brown picked up on a pass rush tip and had 5 sacks in one game. So I do know that those little things can make a difference. And Rattler was sacked 9 times in that game. I don't expect that to happen again this year. And I don't think South Carolina's offensive line is great, but I do think that there was something to that. I think so that was a factor in that game. I think Georgia's going to have their share of sacks because of the nature of the South Carolina offense. Those other offenses you talked about, I don't really worry too much about only one sack because those offenses were devised to get rid of the ball quickly. They knew who they were playing against, right? What I'm more concerned with is the lack of the push in the middle. Jalen Carter, if I've said his name once, I've said it 100 times this year already. The guy he talked about the generational talent. I mean, what he did and the way he did it, nobody's going to replicate that in college football. He was an Ndamukong Suh figure, and probably not as celebrated as he probably should have been because there were so many other stars to talk about. But that's what Georgia is missing, and nobody has it. To be clear, it's not like somebody else has that weapon. Nobody's got a Jalen Carter this year, but that does change things a little bit. So I don't worry as much about the sack numbers as I look at the quarterback pressures. I look at turnovers forced. The fact that there were 3 turnovers. I think that was big. I think Jamon Dumas-Johnson talked about they were able to create some more havoc last week, even if it didn't end in sacks. They were able to disrupt and change things. So I'll be curious to see how they do. I'm high on Spencer Rattler. I was last year. I think he's an NFL talent. I don't know that I don't know where he's at with his decision-making process. I don't know how he's going to interview. But I think he's a guy that'll probably be on an NFL sideline somewhere, whether he's starting or backing up or on a practice squad, I don't know. But he's a good quarterback. I just don't think they have the firepower, Brandon, to really pose much of a threat. Just be honest with you.
It's our Georgia Farm Bureau Insider Update with Mike Griffith here on DawgNation Daily. And, of course, we appreciate Georgia Farm Bureau because just like me, I'm a lifelong Georgian, been here entrenched in the state my entire life. That's the way the Georgia Farm Bureau is, too. In counties just like yours all across the great state of Georgia, their agents, their claim adjusters, things like that, they're living right there in your community. They're working. They're taking their kids to Little League. They're going to church. They're doing all those things in the community just like you are there as well. And that kind of mindset of understanding what Georgia is all about, understanding how much our state loves loves football and loves the things that happen around football. It's that same level of knowledge and intuition about what makes us Georgians that makes Georgia Farm Bureau such a great company to do business with when it comes to your insurance needs, auto insurance, life insurance, home insurance, those types of things. Georgia Farm Bureau is always about that. For years now here on DawgNation Daily, you've heard me say that Georgia Farm Bureau is always the home team. So when you're in need of some new insurance coverage, I want you to check out Georgia Farm Bureau and find out why the things that I've said are so true. Please find them online, gfbinsurance.com. That's gfbinsurance.com for more on that. Mike, let me squeeze in one more here quick before we let you go. You had a chance on Saturday to be on hand for the Alabama loss to Texas, the most thrilling moment of the season here thus far. What was it like there in the stadium? Kind of a behind-the-scenes look at what I believe is, in a lot of ways, the end of the Alabama dynasty. What did you make of what you saw?
Well, I mean, it was an unbelievable environment. You know, I'd put it up there, you know, with Georgia, Notre Dame, and Georgia, Tennessee. You know, the crowd was unbelievable. The noise, you know, they did a great job. You know, Alabama had a tremendous home field advantage. But, you know, look, Texas went in there and did what they had to do. You know, Quinn Ewers, you know, played about a perfect game. Sarkisian was playing chestnut checkers. You knew exactly how to attack Alabama and had the personnel to do it. I'll tell you this, Brandon. I don't think Texas beats Alabama without a Donnie Mitchell. I'll tell you that. You know, they've got two really special receivers in Xavier Worthy and Donnie Mitchell, and that's probably one of the reasons why you picked them to go to the playoff. We'll see if they sustain their success. That's been an issue for Sark. Texas with only one 10-win season in the last 13 years, but certainly this was a team that was up to the test. I thought Alabama did a really poor job. Tommy Rees did a really poor job. And, you know, sometimes we all kind of sit around and complain about Kirby running the ball in the first quarter, right? Well, if the option is to either run it and make a team travel the full length of the field, which is how Kirby plays it, versus Alabama throwing it on their end of the field and giving Texas a short field and momentum, you know, that made a little bit more sense. You said, you know, look at this guy. Here's Jalen Milroe making his third career start, and they're calling a play where he's throwing it across the field into the flats. Very, very dangerous pass. You know, to me, that's where I said, you know what, Kirby would have run it there. Kirby would have run it and said, you know what, guys, we're going to run it. We're going to punt it. We're going to make Texas go 80 yards in our stadium. But that's not what Alabama did, and I thought that was a critical mistake because Texas got early momentum, and they stayed ahead of the chains, and they maintained it, right? And there was another pick that got brought all the way back to the 5. Brandon, those two interceptions by Jalen Milroe amounted to 10 points. The difference in the game was Quinn Ewers and how he was coached versus Jalen Milroe and how he was coached. I'll say this. I know that I think we're all ready for the Alabama dynasty to be over with, but I would say not so fast. If this gets corrected, this is a team that may not lose another game. This is a very powerful, very talented football team. Now, they've got to get the coaching put together, and I'm not convinced they will. Tommy Rees, no, I'm not convinced that they're necessarily going to figure this out. But if they do, you could see the talent. You can definitely see the talent, and it will take a team, much like it would have taken a team to beat Georgia, and has taken a team to beat Georgia, that has multiple good receivers that can run past defensive backs, NFL defensive backs, and quarterbacks that can make those throws. There's only 3 or 4 teams that have that sort of personnel and coaching. I think Texas is one of them. Ohio State was one of them last year. Georgia could be one of them if one of these transfer receivers pans out. But this is worth watching. I'm not ready to write off Alabama quite yet. I'm with you. I still favor Georgia. I still pick Georgia to win the SEC, to be clear. I picked Georgia to win the SEC and to go to the playoff. I picked Georgia. But I'm telling you, I don't think the tide's dead yet.
Mike, thanks for being on the program today. We appreciate that. We'll look forward to reading more from you at DawgNation.com, and we'll see you next week as a part of a Georgia Farm Bureau Insider Update.
Look forward to it. Thanks, Brandon.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Let me share with you a thought about Alabama, and then when I move on, talk about a couple of other things here. I think there's something really important that you see playing out with the Crimson Tide, and it's a reminder of our offseason conversation. And it's the kind of thing that probably translates from year to year, and it's similar to what I've said in the past in that for college football fans who are always kind of trying to decide what the real story is and how do you read the rumor mill and how do you make sense of, in some cases, conflicting information that's out there, just keep in mind, I've said when it comes to Georgia in the past, that good news frequently leaks out, but bad news almost never does. And so therefore, when there's no news, sometimes that's a sign of bad news, because if it was good news, somebody somewhere would be saying, hey, I heard so-and-so looks great at camp. But we never hear, I heard so-and-so looks terrible at camp, right? Do you notice that? And it just sort of stands to reason the door would swing both ways, that if so-and-so player is capable of having a great camp, showing up in the best shape of his life, it's also possible that somebody else somewhere is 10 pounds overweight. But we never really hear that. We only hear the good thing, because good news frequently leaks out, bad news never does. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just human nature, possibly. Well, the Alabama quarterback thing is kind of an example of that, too. We heard very little about what was going on with the Alabama quarterback situation for a long time. Spring practice leading into the spring game. And once we got a chance to see that, we were left to conclude, oh, yeah, Jalen Milroe's no better right now than he was when he was playing in some games a year ago. He ain't it. And Ty Simpson doesn't seem to be a factor at all. And then during the summer, in terms of substantial, actual rumor stuff, and listen, I'm not living in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, but I'm like many of you. I'm trying to get as much SEC information as I can get, and there's a lot of curiosity about the Alabama quarterback situation. But there was never any real substantial rumors that came out of that situation. It was the dog that wasn't barking. And when you see no news, when you hear no news, oftentimes that's a sign of bad news. And the truth is that Jalen Milroe really isn't any better now than he was a year ago, even though Alabama fans obviously hoped that he would be. And Tyler Buckner and Ty Simpson, how bad must they be not to be able to get any playing time away from Milroe here right now? And by the way, go back to the Middle Tennessee State game. It was Buckner who came in second. Ty Simpson's just not a factor. It doesn't appear to be, at least right now. Milroe is a very good runner. He's got a strong arm. He can throw a deep ball, but he doesn't throw any intermediate passes at all. You're not going to win games that way, games of note. Now, will Alabama still have a fine record? Sure. Could they be 11-1? They absolutely could be. Should Georgia be afraid of Alabama in an SEC championship? No. When it comes to December through January, you got to play somebody, right? You've got to play somebody. And in terms of the typical team that Georgia might play as an opponent in the SEC championship, especially moving forward in future years when it's going to be the best two teams in the league that are playing, given the fact that you've got to play somebody, I think that Georgia should be as excited about playing this version of Alabama as any team that it will play in any SEC championship into the next however many years in the future, because this is pretty clearly a flawed Alabama. Now, maybe the rest of the SEC West has greater flaws than that, but if this is the team that you would have to beat to kind of punch your final ticket for a playoff spot, that's about as advantageous of a position, I believe, from December on that Georgia's capable of finding itself in. This is not the same Alabama, not by a long shot. And the fact that the other quarterbacks on that roster seemingly aren't capable of pushing Jalen Milroe aside, that may be all you need to know to prove that. Now, let's get ready to go cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Let's get ready to talk about a fun 2024 on tap for Royal Caribbean. You've heard me talk before about the debut of Icon of the Seas. It's in January. I am hoping like heck to get a chance to be on that ship. I want to see it for myself because it's the largest cruise ship that's ever been constructed. And as someone who's been on a lot of Royal Caribbean cruise vacations, who's had a chance to experience a lot of the best of Royal Caribbean, including those Oasis-class ships, the newest of that fleet, Wonder of the Seas, on that a couple of times last year, just given the fact that I've had a chance to experience all of that, seeing how the brand new Icon of the Seas is going to change the game and redefine all of that, man, I'm so excited about seeing that for myself. At least I hope I get a chance to do that. And if you talk to our friend Jessica Slater, our great travel agent who's been specially selected for us by Royal Caribbean, you can do the same thing. You can call her 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. Also email her jslater@dreamvacations.com. Email her jslater@dreamvacations.com. And keep in mind that Icon is not the only brand new ship that Royal Caribbean's debuting in 2024. How about in July, Utopia of the Seas, brand new Oasis-class ship. It's the latest in the line of the Oasis-class ships that have kind of been the game changer prior to this, and it's going to go out of Port Canaveral. 3 and 4 night sailing. It's going to be an incredible experience. Make sure you check that out. All right, a couple of SEC through stories I want to get to here before we talk to Jake Fromm coming up in just a moment's time. So I was thinking about this, and I guess I said this in a radio interview yesterday. It's one of those things where I didn't necessarily mean to say it, but after I did say it, I was like, yeah, I believe that's probably true. So if you think about what Georgia's top competition has been outside the SEC the last couple of years, not within the league, and within the league that's formidable enough, but outside the SEC, think about that as being like an Ohio State and a Michigan. If you think about that as kind of being the top competition for Georgia outside the SEC, I think this year provides a very different kind of challenge for Georgia, perhaps, if it plays out the way that it seems like it might here right now. You know, when you faced a Michigan, you always knew if you're Georgia, you had a pretty supreme talent edge. Now, the media, national media especially, doesn't seem to know that, but we all know that Michigan really can't stay on the same field with Georgia. It has a few good players, but Georgia has a far better roster, and that Michigan tries to be a sort of a sugar-free version of Georgia there in the Big Ten, but when they face the real thing, the full-calorie version, down here in the South, they simply can't keep pace. Michigan isn't a threat to Georgia, I don't believe, at all, no matter what Reese Davis has said. Ohio State was obviously capable of playing a close game with Georgia last year because they have an incredible level of talent. Their explosive potential on offense, listen, I hate Ohio State, but I'll be more than happy to tell you that is absolutely for real. But when push comes to shove, Georgia both physically and mentally is just tougher than Ohio State is. And eventually that's a kind of an Achilles heel for Ohio State that Georgia had its chance to exploit. So I believe that both of the top competitors to Georgia outside the SEC last couple of years had a kind of fatal flaw that made them a little easier for Georgia to possibly handle. My pick is still that Georgia's going to win this year's national championship, and I suspect that Georgia, more likely than not, wins this national championship pretty easily. But I do believe what appears to be, in my mind anyway, possibly the top two non-SEC competitors for Georgia right now, I suspect they do provide a little bit of a different kind of challenge. I think that Texas looked good on Saturday night. I think that Quinn Ewers, as I expected him to be, right now has a look of a guy who might be the best quarterback in college football, Caleb Williams included. And I believe that Steve Sarkisian, who was always the best play caller that Nick Saban ever employed, he looked like a pretty diabolical offensive mind in Tuscaloosa there on Saturday night. I think that Georgia would face a pretty stiff challenge from Texas. It's a game I believe that Georgia would win, but there's an element of what Texas brings to the table right now that I think is a little bit more of a challenge for Georgia than what Michigan or Ohio State would have been in either of the last 2 years. I believe that to be true. And in a roundabout way, I kind of think the same thing about Florida State a little bit as well. That what Florida State does really well, in addition to having Jordan Travis as a quarterback, I mean, the presence of Keon Coleman right now as a transfer wide receiver, that's a real weapon. And, you know, the overall high school recruiting for Norvell probably hasn't quite gotten cranked up yet the way that it wants to. But I think you go back to that LSU game on that Sunday night to begin the season, Florida State looked really good. If I told you right now you could face the Michigan team from 2021 or the Florida State team from 2023 and guarantee yourself a victory, I would hope that you would realize that the Michigan game from 2021 is a far more guaranteed win. And I think the same thing is probably true when you compare Georgia to Ohio State. I believe that Ohio State had to play its best possible game to keep it close with Georgia a year ago, but in terms of teams more likely to play it close with Georgia on kind of a more of a, I guess, expected basis, I think that Texas and Florida State perhaps are teams that might be more capable of doing that. So in other words, let me restate myself here. I still believe that Georgia wins the national championship. I still believe that Georgia is a pretty wide gap between itself and everybody else. If the game is closer against South Carolina on Saturday, perhaps I'll rethink that some. But for now, I'm confident in my opinion. But I'm also of the belief that the top national competition outside the SEC is the likes of a Florida State and a Texas. That's a little bit of an interesting challenge in a way that Big Ten teams such as Ohio State and Michigan were just never going to be for UGA. Let me also just kind of mention this here really quick. I was going to do a couple of these SEC games. Let me just do this one for now. We'll do LSU more probably tomorrow. So Tennessee goes on the road on Saturday, and they are about a touchdown favorite or so against Florida. Now, I think that Tennessee last year, and listen, we have very little respect for the Vols overall, but going on the road last year and throttling LSU the way that it did, that was a real win. That was a significant accomplishment and an achievement for Tennessee. And it was a reminder of this is a Tennessee team that is clearly playing better than maybe some of us thought they probably would be. I was relatively high on Tennessee to begin last year. Probably got that right. But Tennessee surprised a lot of people with the ease with which it handled LSU in its own stadium last year. So you're left to wonder, what about traveling to Florida here this year? About a touchdown favorite. Is this another chance for Tennessee to flex on the road? This is a game that takes place on Saturday. At one point in time, this was as big a game as the SEC had. It's obviously lost a lot of its luster since then. I think, though, there's a big difference between the Tennessee team that went to LSU last year and the Tennessee team that goes to Florida on Saturday. Keep in mind, Jalen Hyatt last year was the Blitnikoff Award winner. Hendon Hooker, Tennessee fans thought he should have been a Heisman finalist. Now, we don't think they're right about that. We think Tennessee fans are as delusional about that as they are about a lot of other stuff. But the fact they even can have that conversation gives you an idea of how good Hooker was a year ago. right now, I don't see a Biletnikoff wide receiver on this team. I don't believe Brew McCoy is going to be that. And I don't really see right now Joe Milton reminding anyone of Hendon Hooker. Now, I think the Vols are going to still score a lot of points here this year. That's a dangerous offense. But this is not the kind of offensive firepower that was just absolutely annihilating a team like LSU on the road. In other words, I think right now Tennessee's being forced to give way too many points to Florida. And I obviously realize how bad Florida played its Week 1 game on that Thursday night there in Salt Lake City. But keep in mind, what was really Florida's biggest problem there that night? It's mistakes, right? It's penalties. It's embarrassing things. It's the kind of haphazard mess that can be cleaned up. And while I would be shocked if Florida actually won the game, I'd also be somewhat shocked if it's not close late. So I believe in what seems like it's a fairly kind of lackluster weekend for college football. The Florida-Tennessee game could actually end up being better in reality than it appears to be on paper. It's a test that Tennessee hopes to try to pass for Florida, who just needs anything they can to kind of grasp onto for the positive right now. Perhaps keeping it close against the Vols on Saturday might restore a little bit of confidence down there in Gainesville. By the way, it's also interesting to see this, and then after this we'll talk to Jake Fromm. Dan Mullen doing these ESPN deals. He was on with Matt Berry. He actually called out Napier a little bit, mentioning the fact that he hasn't won a rivalry game yet and how Florida fans get restless after a while if you don't do that. I think Mullen, who I obviously don't like at all, is well within his rights. He doesn't owe Billy Napier anything. You know, they pushed Mullen out the door because they think winning at Florida is supposed to be easy in this current era of the SEC that includes a behemoth like Georgia. Billy Napier is showing you right now that these games are actually pretty hard to win. So if Dan Mullen doesn't want to throw a lifeline to a Billy Napier, he's well within his rights to do that. And it sounds like that's exactly what Mullen intends to do based on his comments here this week. Pretty interesting stuff. We will make that cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And now we'll get ready to talk to Jake Fromm as a part of a Kroger Fresh Take. And here on DawgNation Daily, time now for a Kroger Fresh Take. We'll bring on former Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm. And Jake, always great to have you here as a part of the program each and every week. Hope you're doing well, and we certainly appreciate your time.
Yeah, Brandon, thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
So obviously Monday night, a crazy situation on Monday Night Football. Aaron Rodgers, the quarterback injury. I was joking with you before he came on the air of, you know, are you going to be the next quarterback now, the New York Jets? But obviously this is one of those things I do think a lot of folks are kind of curious about sometimes, which is, you know, that process of, you know, what a team like the Jets might perhaps do, or for other quarterbacks such as yourself who, and by the way, it may not just be like, you know, guys like yourself who are kind of, you know, in the phase of your career you're in, you know, a younger guy. We could be hearing perhaps about a Matt Ryan or somebody like that who maybe gets in the mix here on this a little bit too. What's that process behind the scenes like when maybe the Jets are looking for a new quarterback and maybe there are, you know, guys who kind of wonder of, is this a chance for maybe me to get on an active roster? What's that like for those of us who kind of only see that from afar?
Yeah, I mean, first off, just saying it's just a bad and terrible day for football. You know, when a guy like Aaron Rodgers goes down on the fourth play of the game, you know, for the season, man, that's just terrible, man. It really does. It sucks, obviously, for him and for that team and for that organization and franchise who's, you know, kind of riding high on him and expecting a lot of things. But you know, as far as, you know, what they do now, you know, that's, you know, for them behind the scenes, and, you know, I'm sure they're exploring kind of a little bit of everything, but I'm sure it's probably a pretty grim day in the building even after a win. And you know, for younger quarterbacks around the league, you just never know. You know, that's why we always, you know, are staying ready, you know, and nothing surprises me in this league. So that's just part of it.
Well, that's certainly good advice, Jake. I think that's really well said. As far as Georgia goes, on Saturday we saw Carson Beck make his second start. I think, to my eyes, probably looked a little bit sharper, seemed a little bit more comfortable, I guess. I mean, the overall passing yardage was slightly less, but he did throw a couple of touchdowns. He had an interception, but I don't think you would say that interception was his fault. Did you get a chance to see much of Carson on Saturday, and what did you think about his second start, if you did?
Yeah, I would agree with you there. Man, still from an offensive scheme point, you can see that they're spreading the ball around, getting everybody, all the players involved. Even put Dylan Bell at running back and got to see some explosive runs out of him. But as far as Carson goes, it's just, you know, good to see him getting those reps. Even for a older guy, so to speak, on the team, there's still nothing you can do to simulate a real active game with the bullets flying and being able to make those decisions in crunch time situations. So it's good for him to have these 2 games under his belt. But you got a big test next week and you play South Carolina. his first SEC opponent, and it's gonna be a fun one to watch.
I think we've talked about some version of this before, but, Kirby Smart said after the UT Martin game no, we didn't hold anything back offensively. And yet, even those of us who are not former coaches and players, we sort of feel like when we look in on this, it does look different than what it typically looks like. I mean, Georgia scored 65 points in a national championship game. The version of the offense we've seen from Georgia the last 2 weeks certainly doesn't seem to look necessarily like that. As someone who has a little bit more of an idea of what Georgia's trying to achieve schematically and kind of what games like this sort of feel like, I mean, how do you describe the mentality from an offensive standpoint of what you want to show versus what you don't want to show, and why it is sometimes, whether even again on Saturday, another somewhat slow start for the offense, like why do you think that perhaps is?
Yeah, I think what can also get lost in the what do you show, what do you not show, but I think that happens throughout football and across the country, is a lot of offensive players, coaches, and staffs are trying to figure out what is our offensive identity. Mm-hmm. Who are we? What can we, fall back on to get us through, to pull us across the finish line? What are we? Where's our identity? Are we a throwing team? A perimeter team, get the ball in the perimeter? Are we run and pound the ball down your throat and then throw a couple deep shots, behind you? There's just so many questions that are getting answered on every single play. Even for the offensive coaching staff to figure out what can they count on their guys to do, and who can execute, this and that play.
Do you have an opinion on what you think this Georgia team's offensive identity should be?
I think they're still figuring that out. I would love to say that they'll be able to run the ball with physicality, but I think they still have yet to prove that, and those guys up front to really just take that personality on. But I think they're going to have to rely a lot on Carson and this throwing game to bail them out a lot of times, because I don't think they have that explosive back out of the backfield, which is why Dylan Bell went back there to give them those explosive runs. And to take care of the business when it needs to get taken care of.
How about the guy on the other side? Have you seen enough of Spencer Rattler to have much of an opinion on him? Because from where I'm sitting, this is a guy coming out of high school, goes to Oklahoma and had a ton of hype around him then, probably didn't quite live up to that. And now he's going in year 2 of being the South Carolina quarterback. And to me, Jake, it almost seems like if he's now kind of waited around long enough that I think he actually might be a little bit underrated. He's got a ton of experience. I think that experience gives him a chance to be pretty successful. Games like Tennessee a year ago, Clemson at the end of the season, he was really playing a pretty high level of football for South Carolina at the end of last year. I think he's probably a pretty good quarterback, in other words. Do you have much of an opinion on Spencer Rattler?
Yeah, I mean, first off, a very talented player, but I think you can just about argue, which I think you are, like he's starting to get into that dangerous category because you just don't know which Spencer Rattler is going to show up on each and every Saturday. Is it going to be the Spencer Rattler that's going to turn the ball over 4 times, or is it going to be the Spencer Rattler like the Tennessee game who throws for 400 yards and 4 or 5 touchdowns? So you just don't know, but you definitely want to cover your bases, so to speak, on defense and even on offense to make sure you're taking care of the ball, because a guy like that can beat you if you let him, because he is capable of making all the plays on a football field that need to be made.
Did you get a chance to watch the Texas-Alabama game on Saturday? First of all, an incredibly entertaining game, but what do you make of what looks like a little bit of a change in the guard here? Alabama maybe taking a step back, and finally, after a lot of years of a lot of hype, maybe Texas really is a good team this time around.
Yeah, maybe they are. I think for anybody to go in to Bryant-Denny Stadium and play the Alabama Crimson Tide and to beat them at home, that's a really, really big deal. It doesn't matter which Alabama team they are, the Alabama of old, the Alabama of now. It doesn't matter. That's a tough feat and accomplishment to do, and they got it done, and they did it by double digits too. A.D. Mitchell played really well. Quinn Ewers played, very, very good. You can tell that he's got some experience under his belt now and is playing on a higher level. So what Alabama is, I don't know. But me and Drew Butler talked about it on the podcast last night. It just doesn't look like they have the guys around the line of scrimmage, the offensive line, the defensive line, those game changers, those game wreckers, the difference makers. maybe they just don't have those guys on the roster or aren't playing well right now. But I think they have a lot of things to figure and to find out about what their identity is. Do they need to run the quarterback more or just really figure out and get better at the throwing game deeper down the field? So a lot of questions to be answered. I think the college football world right now is wide open. I think it's anybody's to take.
I want to ask you more about that here in a moment. Let me remind folks, though, this is our Kroger Fresh Take with Jake Fromm here on DawgNation Daily. And, of course, you're getting ready for game day. You got your watch parties, you got your tailgates, all that kind of stuff. You want more time to enjoy the football season that you love and perhaps more money to spend on the things that make football season so much fun. That's where the new membership opportunity from Kroger can be a big help for you here. I'm talking about Kroger Boost. You can try free right now for 30 days when you go to Kroger.com/boost to learn more about that. It's Kroger.com/boost. And then once you become a member, you're saving big bucks because you're getting twice the fuel points every time you visit. You're also getting a chance at free grocery delivery. So it's an amazingly convenient and really beneficial membership program. Check out Kroger Boost online at Kroger.com/boost for more on that. So, Jake, I think I kind of agree with you that it seems like this season perhaps provides the opportunity to be a little bit more wide open. Now, I think there's a part of me that still thinks that Georgia has a chance to show itself to still be far better than whoever the next best team is. I think there's a chance we could still learn that about Georgia. But in terms of where the SEC pecking order is right now, we've already seen LSU lose. We've already seen Alabama lose. South Carolina's lost to North Carolina. Texas A&M just lost to Miami. That the idea that the SEC as a league is far better than the other Power 5 leagues, based on the early kind of non-conference results, I don't think we can necessarily say that right now. So from that standpoint, at least, this is a little bit different vibe around the SEC, I think, than what we've seen the last couple of years.
I agree with you. I mean, personally, as an SEC guy myself, it kind of hurts a little bit. That you're not able to parade that around that the SEC is just a better football conference right now, because the proof's not in the pudding right now. South Carolina losing to North Carolina. And even Auburn, who went over to Cal and played Cal, they didn't play great. They got lucky and came away with one. So, just to me, the dominance right now just isn't there. And you mentioned it as well. I mean, Georgia hasn't really played anybody and gotten tested yet, so we don't know how good or not good they are. I still think they're a great football team, but I definitely think there's a lot of improvement across the board to be made.
Just out of curiosity, did your parents travel out to Berkeley? I heard that was quite a culture shock for a lot of the Auburn folks, very much entrenched in the SEC world. Berkeley's a little bit of a different kind of place. I heard there was a little bit of a culture shock out there, a little bit of a cultural divide, if you will, between some of the Pac-12 folks in Berkeley and those Auburn folks that traveled out there.
Yeah, they did travel out there. Definitely need to give them a call and see how it was. But talking to my brother, he did say that the Auburn fans traveled well.
Yeah, I heard that.
And was pretty well represented out there.
That's good to know. Jake, it's great to talk to you. Appreciate you being here as part of our Kroger Fresh Take. Best of luck as you continue your work and weekly preparations to be ready for whatever's next when it comes to your NFL career. We're certainly excited for you there on that, and we appreciate the insight into what's going to happen for Georgia against South Carolina on Saturday. Hope you get a chance to enjoy the game somewhere, and we will look forward to getting a chance to talk to you very soon.
Yeah, thank you, Brandon. Appreciate you.
Great stuff from Jake Fromm there, the former Georgia quarterback. Always enjoy that conversation. Speaking of enjoyable conversations, when you're hanging out with friends, one of the things that makes those conversations more enjoyable is a chance to sit back and relax and enjoy a little bit of the finished long drink there, too. Because right now, not only do you have the 4 varieties of the finished long drink they sort of made famous, the long drink traditional, the blue can, the grapefruit flavor, the gin kick, the long drink cranberry, which so many of the folks in my neighborhood seem to love, long drink strong, 8.5% alcohol by volume. We had that as part of our golden shoe a little earlier this week. Long drink 0, no carbs, no sugar. I should probably do a little bit more of that than I maybe sometimes do. But the point is that those 4 varieties of finished long drink, which has been so enjoyable for us, now you get the brand new version for a limited time here in the Peach State. How about the peach flavored version of the finished long drink? So if you haven't tried that yet, go to thelongdrink.com, put in your zip code, and you can find out where to pick some up today. And you can be enjoying for a tailgate party, for a get-together, or whatever you got going here as you head towards the fall. A little bit of finished long drink and the peach-flavored version of the finished long drink. That sounds perfect for the fall, so make sure you check that out. Online, thelongdrink.com. And speaking of a golden shoe, we did give out a Finish Long Drink themed Golden Shoe the other day. We have a very fun Golden Shoe to give you here in the spirit of Georgia playing South Carolina on Saturday. I'll show you this on the screen. Bill Baker sent this to me. He says, for Chicken Week, meaning the game against South Carolina, I humbly submit an entry for Golden Shoe Award consideration. He says, I pass by this gravel dead-end road every day in Lake Wiley, South Carolina. And what would be an appropriate name for a gravel dead-end road? How about Spurrier Court? Now, I don't believe it's actually named after the former South Carolina coach, but when you think about how things have kind of gone for Spurrier as of late, his alma mater, Florida, they're not doing very well. Steve's obviously miserable about that. Georgia's on top of the college football world, going to beat the team that he used to coach badly on South Carolina there as well. And don't forget, it was a bad victory for Georgia against South Carolina that ran Spurrier out of coaching back in 2015. So all of that very appropriate. Golden Shoe Award, hashtag Golden Shoe, hashtag go for 3 in 23, hashtag go dogs. All of that from Bill Baker. A well-earned Golden Shoe going his direction. And speaking of the lousy, stinking Gators, how about a Gator Hater countdown? 45 days from now, Georgia back in Jacksonville, beating Florida. Again, boy, that's fun to think about. And a great way to close us out today. We'll see you tomorrow, DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. And on video, so happy to be back with you live again for our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. And so many of you who've been kind enough to stick with us and be a part of the pre-recorded shows, we certainly appreciate that. Really, only a small portion of our overall audience is impacted by us not being live. Most people don't watch the show live, but I like doing it live for two reasons. I said this before. Because it's just a different energy for me. I'm just a different person, just sort of sitting here, kind of flying without a net. It just kind of creates a level of focus that you don't have in a pre-recorded situation. Vacation shows you kind of do because, typically speaking, I'm excited about taking some sort of cruise or something like that. So that's my level of focus when it comes to something like that. But in a normal situation, normal day, you just kind of feel different when you're doing it live. And it's also the chance right now, as we do for our R.S. Andrews Cool Down each and every day, getting a chance to talk to all of you, something I have not been able to do in a few days here. So I'm going to settle in. We're going to do some comments, and we'll give you at least 20 minutes here. How about that? We'll probably do about 20 minutes, and then we'll hopefully do this every day for many more days to come, because I believe, the best that I can tell, this has all worked pretty well today, which we thought it would. We wouldn't have tried this live if we didn't have a pretty good expectation it was going to work, but listen, my expectations for what's going to work, some days you never know. Anyway, let's dive in here. Comments on YouTube to begin. Brian Hatcher giving you the and on video. Brian, you better believe I'm happy to be saying that for real again today. Let's see what else. Frank Patterson says he bought the 1990 National Championship Georgia baseball cap and it arrived today and going to wear it this weekend for South Carolina. Listen, that's awesome. So I used to have one of those hats when it was the Georgia baseball hat. Like, it wasn't vintage. It wasn't, retro. It was just the hat. And somewhere over the years, I just didn't have that anymore, but I'd give anything to have that thing back. So I am quite jealous of you there on that. DMAR42 says he's glad that we're back live. He says he's been way too productive at work from 9 until 10:30. That's pretty good there. That's pretty funny. I like that. Good to see Christian here, as always. How about this? Let's go Brandon on his honeymoon in Austin, and it's been great watching the Longhorn faithful flying high this week after that big win. So let's go. I hope you have a great honeymoon. Congratulations on a great marriage, and you tell those Texas fans, celebrate that win against Alabama, because when it comes to big wins against SEC teams, we think that's the only one they're getting here this year. If they run up at Georgia in the college football playoff at any point in time, while Texas may be a formidable foe, we just believe that Georgia's at a different level. So you make sure you pass that message on, let's go, and y'all enjoy that honeymoon. That's good stuff. Foster Moss thinks that Eddie may have gotten a little slimmer during all of this. Perhaps that's the case. Paul Moon says C.J. Smith's about to be that dude. I've been impressed, and I haven't really talked to y'all about this a ton, but like the last couple of games, I've been doing some stuff on the field. So normally I watch the game from the press box. I've been down on the field the last two home games. Saturday was so hot, but still nonetheless down there. And one of the perspectives that I got from being down on the field is that C.J. Smith is a little beefier than I thought he was. Obviously you think about him as being a really fast receiver, but he's got a little more, stoutness to him than I realized. I think he could be a very interesting player for Georgia. Scott Harris says that Bowers needs a big week. Time to get him on the Heisman list. It was South Carolina a year ago that Bowers did have a big game. Had the rushing touchdown, things like that. So perhaps that's the case. Jonathan Aaron says that I was lying last week, that I was not pre-recorded because of some sort of technical stream issue. I was pre-recorded so I could take another cruise vacation. If I do have to pre-record, I want it to be for a good reason, such as a cruise vacation. But alas, last week that was not the case. Texas Dog, who obviously would know, says here in Dallas, all the Texas fans are chanting, "We want Georgia." Yeah, Texas, we played that video, at least from the one from Austin the other day, of them chanting that "We want Georgia." We have seen that. So my advice is be careful what you get, what you wish for. Be careful about it. Jeremy Harbin says the Bauer should have had 2 touchdowns last week, but he dropped them, which was unbelievable because that never happens. Yeah, it was one of those things where, like, he was shocked about it. And once again, being down the field, I saw this, like, very, very close. He was, like, shocked that he dropped them, and then he was so mad at himself. Like, he was so mad at himself. So, obviously, none of us expect Bowers to do that, and Bowers doesn't expect himself to do that either. Quabna Fields mentioning about C.J. Smith, didn't realize he was 6'3" with that speed, but he says he's a new wide receiver because Smith himself has said he wasn't really, a polished catcher and, catcher of the ball in high school. Yeah, I think that C.J., he looks the part, man. He really looks the part. He really does. Fred Gunn says Brock will be fine. I totally agree with that. Stick D says we want UAB. Night game in Sanford Stadium coming up next Saturday. Then after that, it's all SEC level or at least Power 5 level competition the rest of the way. Frank Batterson says the UGA alumni here in Miami have been very welcoming. That's good to hear. Glad to know that. Memphis Dog says he thinks I have a cruise tan. So I have been, like being outside for the games gives me a little tan. I do baseball with my son almost every day. That gives me a little bit of a tan. Like I haven't done the pool since the 4th of July. Typically speaking, I like to try to sneak over to the pool as much as I possibly can. Would obviously love to be on a cruise vacation right now if I could find a way to swing that, but I have not been. This is more just regular life, doing the baseball, going to the games, doing some stuff like that. But my goal is to be tan 12 months out of the year. That's my goal. I feel like I'm living a good life. I can stay tan that long. Jay Shipe says he's going to be at the UGA game tailgating on Saturday. A couple of custom UGA poker tables, wall art in the back of a truck for sale that I've been making. Jay, that's really cool. That's a very talented thing. Foster Moss says I learned how to swim. Yeah, that brings back an old joke here. He says, Frank Patterson says, I need to meet up with Jay. He says his work has been amazing. The work that he's done has been amazing. I'd love to see that, Jay. I really would. I'd love to see that. Good to see Cassie Turner in here. I feel like we haven't seen Cassie in a few days, or more than that, really. But I'm glad she's here today. Maybe we had to go away for a while and come back to get Cassie to show back up again. But nonetheless, she says, I'm just happy that all my sports teams are overlapping so I can watch baseball when football isn't on. Yeah, I love this time of year. Braves playoffs bleeding right into a football weekend. That's going to be fantastic. Stream Gene mentioning Ra Thomas. Yeah, before the year's done, I believe that Ra and Dominic both are going to be heard from probably in a big way. Yeah, Cassie, we are glad you're back. We're glad you're here. Jeremy Harbin mentioning Matt Olson last night tying the Braves franchise record for most home runs in the season. What Andrew Jones had done previously. 51 home runs is a real deal number. That is a real deal number. Frank Patterson says Jay needs to roll those poker tables to the bookstore. Yeah, maybe we'll sit down and do a little Nassau game or something like that. That's pretty good stuff. Fred Gunn reminding me that I haven't seen any of y'all in a few days, which is very true. Let me go over to Facebook for a moment, see how they're doing. I am so excited about Saturday's game. We haven't really done the recruiting angle on this yet, but the recruiting visitors for Saturday, massive. Obviously, KJ Bolden going to be there. You've probably seen reports about that, which I told you about. I said that when he committed, that I didn't think this was over by a long shot, and I think that watching what happens on a game day might be pretty interesting, and there you go. David Ho, glad you're back here today. Sorry you got to check out on us, but we're glad you're here right now. Joseph Kennedy says, where's Connor? Connor's on the show Tuesday. Terry Rickman says he's going to be eating barbecue chicken on the grill on Saturday. I said this. I was on video for a little bit yesterday as a kind of a test just to make sure the stream was working okay. I'm a big fan of tailgate meals themed around the team Georgia's playing. Now, you can't really eat like tiger or elephant, so you can't really do that for like Auburn or Alabama. But love chicken for a South Carolina game. You want some barbecue for an Arkansas game. I'll do a little gator tail before a Florida game, like a low country boil gumbo type thing, some sort of stew for a LSU type game. That's in keeping with their cuisine. It'd be hard to do like a Texas brisket before a game against Texas A&M. It'd be hard to do that, over the span of a tailgate. But if you could find a way to make that happen, I'd be in favor of that. Yeah, I'm always in favor of planning your tailgating meal around the team that Georgia's playing. Alex Lundeen says it may be Beamer Ball who's the guru on special teams, but the only guru I care about is Glenn Schumann. Alex, I like that. That's good stuff. Marshall Fleming said you could do for Alabama an elephant ear funnel cake. Yeah, you could do that. You could do that. Tim Tatum says, I just don't believe that K.J. Bolden was ever in play, just using the Georgia to hype up his recruitment. He's been a Knoll since he was a kid, just saying for the record, but I'm hoping I'm dead wrong because he'd be an awesome get. So, Tim, I certainly won't tell you that I believe for a fact that K.J. Bolden is coming to Georgia. I mean, I was hesitant to say that even prior to the commitment announcement, but I've also been of the belief that even when that announcement went down, that I didn't think that was over with yet. And I don't think it's over with now either. Now, I can't tell you how it's going to end. I really can't, but I don't think it's over. I don't think that's over. But obviously, we shall see. Gerald Harmon says, what do you eat before a game against Tennessee? Cannibal, which is kind of funny. Yeah, I guess the Tennessee thing sort of feels more like what you drink, right? I mean, I'm not the world's biggest, Tennessee whiskey person, but I guess you got some of that going on. Tim says, I sure hope you're right, BA. And listen, I'd love to see it work out Georgia's way. But I mean, I just feel like there's more there than the way that you described that, of a guy who just simply used Georgia to leverage what he wanted from Florida State. I feel like there's more there. I really do. Now, it may not add up to a commitment because these days sometimes it doesn't. But I think there's something there. Anthony Jones says he's just using that as an excuse to get free tickets. I don't think that's the case. I really don't. And this is one of those things I probably am going to I don't think that's the case. There are recruits sometimes who are obviously there just to come to a game, and you can usually tell by the look on their face. There was a pretty big recruit who was in Athens a couple of weeks ago, and it was fairly obvious that he wasn't just like blown away by the experience. He's going elsewhere, and his presence in the game was really more about being with his high school teammates, and it was clearly not the same kind of visit that it is for other people. For instance, when Dylan Raiola's there, and he's been there for the last 2 home games, always a big smile on his face, very active, really great body language from him. If you get a chance to see some photos, or if you're there and you get a chance to get those binoculars trained in on it, judge the body language from KJ on Saturday. I believe you'll see pretty good body language there. I believe that you will. Sally Sanders Free says, I love my Georgia Dogs, but I like Shane Beamer. He's funny. I listened to him explain how we beat them last year. Hilarious. Sally, I agree with you. And you got to understand something, that we are kind of in the minority among Georgia fans on that, because it's kind of an open secret that Kirby doesn't like Shane Beamer very much. And the quirky aspects of Beamer's personality makes that gets on some Georgia fans' nerves, I think, a little bit. But I'm kind of like you on this, in that I want there to be room for a lot of different kind of college coaches. In other words, I love the way that Kirby is, because that's generated a lot of success for Georgia. But I wouldn't want every college football coach to be just like Kirby Smart. If they were, I don't know. I mean, that wouldn't be, to me, all that much fun, because, Kirby is just extraordinarily serious. And that laser-sharp focus has made him incredibly successful, and I wouldn't change anything about that for Georgia, obviously. But I like having a Shane Beamer in the sport. I like having a Sam Pittman in the sport, who's a different kind of thing like that. I liked having Ed Orgeron in the sport, who was kind of his own version of, I'm just going to be my own self here a little bit. I've said before, I kind of like Dabo Swinney more than some of y'all do. That's, a long-time Clemson, long-time Georgia rival, current competitor for kind of supremacy in the sport, at least it has been. But I kind of like some of the willingness of some of those coaches to kind of come across as just sort of a regular guy. Like Beamer kind of gives off, regular guy vibes a little bit. And I think that has worked for his program. And listen, I believe quietly they've recruited better than they've oftentimes been given credit for. I believe that they've won some games on the field that, by comparison, I think that, like, say, Josh Heupel has gotten more credit than some of the stuff that Beamer's done on the field. I think that Beamer probably deserves a little bit more credit for the success that he's had. But generally speaking, I think, as our commenter mentioned, Sally mentioned, I think that his personality is pretty entertaining in some of these press conference situations, and I want there to be a little bit of room for that in college football. Daniel Irvin Wells says Kirby isn't really likable. Shane is. Let me get the rest of this comment. He says, I can see the tension. I like Shane better. I want Kirby as my coach. Yeah, Daniel, I think that's probably true. Whereas, Shane Beamer comes across as a pretty easy guy for me to like, and it sounds like you feel the same way. Sally mentioned the same thing. But I like having Kirby Smart as Georgia's coach, even though there are elements of Kirby Smart which are, pretty intense. But that level of intensity has made Georgia incredibly successful. So Georgia fans, I think, are grateful to have Kirby Smart as a coach, of course. But when it comes to, let's say that Shane Beamer and South Carolina are playing, really most of the other SEC teams, I'm not openly rooting for anybody else other than Georgia, but it's pretty easy for me to root for Beamer in most cases. I'm trying to think of an SEC team. Sam Pittman, I'm going to root for Pittman, of course, but in most cases, I wouldn't have a problem rooting for Shane Beamer to kind of win that game. I probably prefer him to most other coaches in the SEC. That's probably true. Barry Watkins brings up an interesting point. I think this is probably true, that if you always like your coach, you probably ain't coaching right. And I think that's the case. We do live in a day and age in which, your likability, your magnetism in the transfer portal and all the stuff that goes on there, that kind of stuff matters. But there is still an element when you've got to be kind of separate and apart from the rest of the organization as a leader of men. I think you're probably right about that. Anthony Jones says Shane Beamer's like that uncle that comes around on Christmas with all the good presents, and Kirby's like that strict dad that ain't afraid to take you back behind the shed with a belt. There's an element of that feels very true. Alan McGovern asking about a couple of the modern-day players. Breland's the one I'd be interested in watching there. I think we haven't quite finished with Georgia yet when it comes to the defensive line, so that's the one I'd probably watch there. Let me go to DawgNation.com, then I'll come back to YouTube. We'll take kind of one really good swing around the comment section. Low Country Dog says, I've got to root for Eli Drinkwitz because he trolled Dan Mullen. He did do that. For whatever reason, I don't like Drinkwitz as much as I like Beamer, even though some of the things that I say I like about Shane Beamer, Eli Drinkwitz probably has. But I don't find myself rooting for Eli Drinkwitz. I think low-key I don't like Missouri because, to me, Missouri is not a Southeastern team. So I've always had a little bit of a bias against Missouri, probably. Yeah, so I don't love that. But you're right. He did definitely troll Dan Mullen. That was certainly very funny. Somebody said... BMAX says that Shane Beamer is Dan Mullen 2.0. I understand why Georgia fans feel that way, but my issue with Mullen is that Mullen does not come across to me as very genuine. He comes across as a guy who's kind of trying to fake a certain kind of folksiness, whereas I think the Beamer thing comes across a little bit more genuine. Who knows how successful he ends up being, but I do think he's being true to his personality doing some of the things that he's doing. Whereas Mullen kind of never felt that way. Do you remember, this is a kind of a obscure reference, but like, you remember when like Mullen brought like Kodak Black in to the Florida program and was trying to do all that kind of stuff? It's fairly obvious that Mullen had no idea what any of that was. The whole thing just felt really like sort of stiff and fake. Like a lot of the stuff that Mullen's tried just sort of felt very fake. Whereas like Beamer, the stuff that he tries, you may not love it. It may seem a little corny, but at least to me, it at least seems to be kind of coming from a real place. Let's see what else. Mitt Layton says, BA live again. Great call on the Bama UT game. Also have to say I haven't seen so much talent and depth with speed ever at Georgia. He says, do you believe, though, it's going to be a process throughout the season and we'll definitely be ready for the run? Speed and elite athletes. Yeah, obviously, we'll see how ready Georgia appears to be on Saturday. I don't think South Carolina is good enough to beat Georgia, but is Georgia good enough to kind of run South Carolina completely out of the stadium? That might go a long way towards what Mitt's talking about there, and I appreciate you saying that. Joe Garliardi says it's good to have us back. Joe, appreciate that. You guys are very kind. Very kind. Let's see what else. B-Mac, thanks for the quality update on our stream situation. Let's see what else. DT on the subject of losing A.D. Mitchell compared to Jermaine Burton. Yeah, man, I don't mind telling you. I think the vibe around both those players is justifiably pretty different. I think that Georgia fans do have a certain kinship with A.D. Mitchell because of the big catches he made in big games. And I've said before, I have no problem calling A.D. Mitchell a DGD. We said this at the time. This is a guy who was a major contributor to 2 national championship teams. That's a big deal. And I hate that he left to go somewhere else. I think that Georgia would obviously be in good shape with him right now. But if he wanted to make that choice, he certainly left Georgia better than he found it. You know, I admittedly don't have the same feeling about Jermaine Burton. I have to be honest about that. I don't wish him poorly. I just don't think about him at all. Trippy Charlie, which I always laugh at that username, says that being a player's coach is one thing, but Kirby gives off more of a professional vibe. Do you want the head coach to be your best friend or a coach who'll push you to higher limits? I agree with almost all of that. I do. I do think that Kirby does have multiple gears where there are moments in which, I mean, he is just like as intense as possible. And I think this is probably true with both staff and players where, like, sometimes he's probably so intense that he's probably pretty difficult to be around. But I do think there are those moments when, like, Kirby Smart's a lifer in the sport, right? He's a lifer in football because I think he enjoys the bonds that are made coach with coach, coach with player, player with coach. And I think that means something to him. And so if you ever catch one of these moments, like sometimes the recruits will share, like, their cell phone video and stuff like that. And if you see a little glimpse of Kirby in those moments, you know, that's not the strict dad, right? It's like, you know, Kirby can be to use the phrase somebody else used, the kind of strict dad figure when that's what the job calls for. But when the job calls for something else, you know, Kirby Smart's capable of being that too. And as someone who is a dad, listen, I try to play both those roles there as well. Like, I do not want to be the cool dad, right? I do not want to be, hey, kids, I'm not like a regular dad. I'm like a cool dad. Like, that's not what I want to be. But I also don't feel like as a dad, it would be my role to kind of constantly be the sort of strict, hard-driving disciplinarian because that's a good way to drive your kids right out of your life once they get older. So I try to kind of like balance both those things, strict when you need to be and relaxed and fun-loving when it's time to kind of create the memories that are going to hopefully bond us for the rest of our lives together. And I think in a roundabout way, coaching's kind of the same thing where, hey, there are moments when you got to be the leader of the organization, and that means making decisions and carrying out those decisions to the disappointment of other people within the organization. But when it's not one of those moments, you ought to be as easy to be around as you possibly can be because that's what keeps people voluntarily wanting to be close to you. And it seems like Kirby Smart probably finds those gears pretty well. Kent Holcomb, thank you for your kind words, and we're glad to have you here. DT on the subject of Shane Beamer wearing the mayonnaise thing. I mean, the coaches don't like the mayonnaise. I know that for a fact. I mean, the coaches do not like the mayonnaise. And, like, keep in mind that did Kirby do the mayonnaise thing in 2021? I guess I never even realized this. Did he get the mayonnaise dumped on him? Because I know he's worn how do I not know this? I know he's worn the leather helmet with the Chick-fil-A thing a million times. Did Kirby do the mayonnaise? Let's see. Hold on one second. How do I not know this? So Kirby, obviously. Hold on, I got to read this. Yeah, y'all help me. I'm trying to find this. Did Kirby do the mayonnaise after Georgia beat Clemson in 2021? I should know that. All right, let me do one more quick trip around the comment section. Let's see what else. Paul Moon says the mayo stunt is gross. I like mayo, but no way. Yeah, so like one thing about me is I'm not really into the condiment game. Do not like mayonnaise at all. Do not like mustard. One of the things our producer and Kaylee Manziel and I share together, we don't like pickles. So anything like you put on like a sandwich or something like that, I'm not into mayo. I'm not into mustard. I'm not into pickles. So, while we're always open to all kinds of advertisements, the one thing that you'll never hear me saying is, oh, my friends, it's so-and-so mustard. My friends, it's so-and-so mayonnaise. I'd be more than happy to have them as a sponsor, but I'm never going to lie to you and say, oh, yeah, I'm just slathering this mayonnaise all over everything. I'm just never going to do that because there is zero chance of that being the case. Don't like mayonnaise, don't like mustard, don't like a pickle. And honestly, I think I would rather get like full speed collision with an outside linebacker than have that mayonnaise dumped all over me. That seems awful. That seems really atrocious. So huge fear of mine to have that mayonnaise poured all over me. Jeremy Harbin says he likes a good dill spear, but he doesn't want whole pickles or hamburger pickles. So there you go. Kenneth Holt says that he says I have desert dry sandwiches. The truth is I don't eat a lot of sandwiches for that very reason. Like the thing people want in their sandwich is a little bit of a condiment type flavoring. But since I don't like that, I pretty much don't eat sandwiches. String Gene says not to mention the food poisoning. Yeah, you can get food poisoning from mayonnaise. You can't be leaving that mayonnaise outside. Jonathan Aaron says this may also be why I hate Tennessee so much because they're throwing the mayonnaise bottles and that's mustard bottles. They're throwing the mustard bottles, which is a good point. Scott Harris says that the mayo thing may just be for the bowl and not for the preseason. You may be right about that. Because at first I was thinking Kirby wouldn't even play in the game if it meant getting poured with the mayonnaise because that's not very presidential. But then I was like, well, no, they did play there in 2021. And they actually gave the Duke's mayonnaise bottle, like the little jar, I guess they call it, the little jar. They gave that to everybody. And so, like, I don't like mayonnaise at all, but my dad loved the Duke's mayonnaise. So I was going to keep the Duke's mayonnaise thing that they gave because it was, like, co-branded with the teams from the game just because it was, like, my dad loved Duke's mayonnaise. And so that was going to, keep that in honor of him. But I think I was so grossed out by the idea of the mayonnaise that I didn't even keep the jar, to be completely honest. But my dad loved Duke's mayonnaise, so that makes me think of him. Let's see what else. All right, get ready to go. Kenny Fuller, great to be live again. Appreciate that. He also says he's ready to dominate South Carolina. Me there as well. Christy says after seeing a special on 2020 on mayonnaise, I won't ever have it outside my home. Christy, what in the world happened in this special? Is there a mayonnaise related controversy that I didn't realize? Frank Patterson, yeah, I do think when Dejon Edwards returns, whenever it happens, it's going to be a big boost to the Georgia running game. I believe that's the case. UGA Boy for Life Brunetti says he loves ketchup because it reminds him of Georgia, which obviously you got that that beautiful bright red. I've kind of gotten to the point now where I don't even really do ketchup much anymore, although I grew up liking ketchup. Brian Hatcher says his respect for me has gone down a half a notch since I don't do the condiments and the pickles and things like that. Yeah, unfortunately, that's the case, unfortunately. Let us get ready to do one final run through the comments. Boy, it's fun to be doing this again, man. I'm so thankful for that. DT said he had a friend that put mayo on his PB&J. Now, that seems pretty gross to me. That seems to be pretty gross. All right, one final over here on Facebook. Barry Watkins and Ken Holm talking about the new thing at Chick-fil-A. I guess it's the pimento cheese thing. When I was a kid, my grandmother used to make me pimento cheese sandwiches. I don't believe I'd eat pimento cheese now either. Not even at the Masters. I go for the barbecue sandwich when I'm at the Masters. In the rare moments I get a chance to do that. Gerald Herman also likes the Duke's mayonnaise there as well. I mean, the one thing that seems to be true is, like I said, I'm basing this on my dad. He loved Duke's mayonnaise. It seems like Duke's is the most popular mayonnaise. All right, we got to get ready to go. William Camacho mentioning the South Florida, Alabama game. Keep in mind, that's a road game for Bama on Saturday. Interesting to see what kind of version of Alabama shows up for that spot. All right, we got to go for now. Great to be doing these comments again with all of you. Y'all make sure you check out R.S. Andrews online for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They'll show up on time. They'll do the work that's promised, the price is promised, including, if you need to, still plenty of warm weather left to go here. Get that air conditioning unit tuned back up to factory fresh specs. You can trust R.S. Andrews on all of that. We will see all of you back here tomorrow, including for our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. Live comments are back. We're happy about that. And, of course, DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management prior to that at 10 a.m. or 9:45 if you want to join us for the 1st and 15 there at DawgNation.com. Either way, have a great day, and we'll look forward to seeing you back here again tomorrow.